December 17, 1944. Near Eweiler, a simple checkpoint was about to become the front line of a different kind of war.
Nobody rolls through tonight without answering for it. In the Ardennes, danger no longer had to wear German gray to be dangerous.
Jeep coming in! Hold the line! Let him see the barrier early. No surprises.
The men in the Jeep wore American uniforms. That was the first reason to trust them, and the first reason not to. At first glance, they passed. At second glance, they almost did. Evening. Identify yourselves.
American patrol. Returning from, road check farther west.
And your unit? 8. Detached traffic detail. Real soldiers answered questions. These men were measuring danger.
Something wrong, Sarge?
Something's not settling right. It was not the wrong answer first. It was the pause.
We need to move now.
I know. Just checking the map.
Password is Flash.
Say that again. We are delayed by the confusion on the road, Sergeant. The English was not bad. That was exactly the problem. He was too careful.
Where you boys coming from?
From the line, near Malmedy area. Then Creel saw something speech could not hide. That's not a standard piece for your kind of patrol. Accent raised the doubt. The weapon began to answer it. They wore the uniforms. They did not wear the habits. Step out of the vehicle. Slowly. Sergeant, this is unnecessary.
Maybe. We're about to find out.
A disguise survives until someone touches what it is hiding. Sarge.
You boys aren't ours.
At one checkpoint, the problem had been caught. Across the front, it was just beginning. 3 men were caught at Eweiler. What frightened the Americans was the question that followed. How many had not been?
What Skorzeny was shown was not a raid. It was a gamble for the entire Western Front.
By October 1944, Germany was no longer dictating the war in the West. It was trying to force a miracle. The offensive would strike through the Ardennes, aiming to rupture the Allied line before the Allies could react properly.
The German hope was simple in concept: hit a weak sector hard, move fast, and tear open the American front before it stiffened.
Behind the rivers and roads stood the larger dream: Antwerp, the port that helped feed Allied momentum in the West.
If the Americans organize quickly behind the breakthrough, we lose the bridge race.
An armored breakthrough could win miles. It could not by itself silence orders, erase signs, or open bridges before the enemy blew them.
This was not sabotage in ordinary uniform. This was sabotage disguised as belonging.
The mission was not merely to sneak. He was to bend the enemy's rear areas out of shape.
To impersonate an American soldier, they would need more than English words. They would need American confidence.
Every bridge still standing for a few extra minutes could change the offensive. Every warning delayed could matter.
The commandos were not expected to destroy the Allied rear, only to make it hesitate at the worst possible moment.
Every detail had to survive a glance, a conversation, and a checkpoint. A single awkward sentence could do what artillery never managed. Stop the mission cold.
If everything worked, the armor would punch through, and the disguised men would make the breakthrough feel larger, faster, and harder to stop.
Skorzeny understood something immediately. This mission lived very close to the edge of the law.
Deception had a legal boundary. Fight in enemy uniform, and the boundary could become a firing squad.
The legal solution was as thin as the cloth that covered it.
The request spread through the Western armies with unusual urgency. Send every man who knew English.
Anyone with English, step forward now.
Where are you from?
I am from Cologne sector, sir.
I worked with American tourists before the war. I know their habits some.
For many, English meant little more than phrases remembered from school books, ports, or old films.
The mission asked for an American illusion built by German soldiers. The search had barely found the first layer.
Only a tiny handful spoke English well enough to pass as natural under pressure.
Not textbook English. American English. Try again. For a mission designed to infiltrate an army, the number of believable infiltrators looked almost absurdly small.
Who plays at Wrigley Field?
I do not know, Herr Instructor. They watched American movies for the same reason actors watch other actors, to steal voice, timing, and behavior.
Not I am going there. Say, I'm headed over there. Again.
I'm headed over there.
The uniform had to survive a glance from men who had worn it for years.
They were taught how to smoke, how to chew gum, how to act bored, because bored men at checkpoints draw less attention than tense ones.
Less formal. Americans complain, joke, curse, shrug. Do not sound like a school book.
Not enough jeeps for the number of teams requested.
When real Shermans could not be found, the Germans built something closer to stage scenery than armored deception.
Skorzeny had asked for specialists, equipment, fluency, and time. He had received pieces of each.
What should have been a seamless covert force was becoming a patchwork built for speed, not certainty. At dawn on December 16, the Ardennes looked quiet enough to hide a disaster.
The offensive began with the oldest language in war: artillery, smoke, and shock.
For a few crucial hours, the Germans had what they needed most: surprise.
Now the disguised detachments began moving into the enemy's rear, looking less like commandos than like ordinary American road traffic.
Do not speak unless you must. And if I must, short answers.
On a calm day, the disguises might have invited scrutiny. In confusion, they blended into traffic.
For a short time, some of the disguised teams did exactly what the plan had demanded. They slipped through. Once inside the rear area, even a single jeep could do more harm with a lie than with a rifle.
This one sends them the wrong way if we turn it 30 degrees.
No bridge exploded. No headquarters burned. But one wrong sign on the right morning could send an entire column off schedule.
Road clear up there?
Yeah, keep west. Bridge traffic's back east.
Take the north turnoff. MPs are redirecting the main route.
A few words, a confident gesture, and the wrong road became the chosen road.
Elsewhere, the mission was even simpler. Silence the line and let confusion grow on its own.
The early successes were real. They were also small, scattered, and dependent on momentum elsewhere.
A command line did not have to stay down for long. It only had to fail at the wrong moment.
Line's dead again! Get someone out there now! Roadblock ahead, sir. Take the East Fork.
No single wrong turn would decide the campaign. Enough wrong turns might still matter. If a wrong sign could mislead, no sign at all could do almost as much.
They said that road's closed.
No, West Fork's bad.
MPs changed it this morning.
Useful as they were, these successes stayed scattered. They did not yet add up to a decisive rear area collapse.
But while the commandos were cutting wires and turning signs, the main offensive was already meeting the problem it could not afford: delay. At places like Elsenborn, the American line bent hard enough to slow the German plan before it could become momentum.
Every hour lost at places like St. Vith narrowed the usefulness of everything Greif was doing behind the lines.
The farther the timetable slipped, the less likely it became that a few disguised teams could save it.
Greif could steal minutes. It could not manufacture an entire breakthrough once the breakthrough stopped behaving like one.
Too many eyes on the roads now.
If the panzers do not break through properly, these teams cannot win the river for them. And just as its military value began shrinking, its psychological value began growing.
They caught Germans in American uniforms east of here. Check everybody.
The operation's greatest force multiplier was no longer deception in the field.
It was fear in the minds of the Americans.
Tactically, Greif was already losing momentum. Psychologically, it was about to become far more dangerous.
Who were you sent after?
Important men, roads, headquarters, confusion.
A rumor written as a report stops feeling like rumor.
What had begun as one prisoner's statement now spread as a warning across an entire rear area.
Could be bluff, could be cover, could be real enough to matter. They're after generals, maybe Eisenhower. In American uniforms.
From that moment on, the danger was no longer only the infiltrator. It was the possibility of one.
And once the rumor reached the command level, it stopped being gossip and became security policy. By the time the warning reached Versailles, Eisenhower's headquarters no longer felt like a headquarters. It felt like a target. No unscheduled stops. No unverified escorts. No exceptions.
We're spending time proving who belongs on this instead of moving.
A new discipline took over the rear. Not speed, not trust. Verification.
At headquarters and beyond, the uniform stopped being reassurance. It became evidence to be tested.
The number of infiltrators mattered less and less. The rumor had become larger than the force that created it.
Security was doing its job.
It was also consuming time the Army had not planned to lose.
Up.
Checkpoint. The American rear was remade into a maze of questions. Nobody passes clean anymore. Everybody answers. A card could be forged. A voice, a habit, a hesitation. Those became the new documents.
Listen to how they talk. Watch where they look. Real men get annoyed. Nervous men perform.
Men began to notice things they had ignored for years. How a strap sat, how a patch was sewn, what gun lay across a lap.
The infiltrators no longer needed to be present at every road. Suspicion was now present for them.
Once the rumor had settled in, even ordinary traffic looked rehearsed.
By then, the checkpoint was not an interruption. It was the system. If papers don't settle it, ask them something an American wouldn't have to think about. Capital of Illinois? What?
Soon the checkpoints were asking not just who you were, but whether you had lived inside America long enough to answer without effort.
Capital of Illinois?
Springfield. I think.
Who's Mickey Mouse's girl? Minnie.
Is this a Joe? What team plays at Wrigley Field?
Cubs.
Now can I move? Who won the World Series in 1940? Cincinnati Reds, right? Huh. Who's Sinatra?
Singer. Skinny kid from Jersey. Can I please go now?
No one had written this system in a manual. The Army invented it on the roadside and spread it by imitation. The passwords no longer guarded the roads alone. Americanness itself had become the password.
Mickey Mouse's girlfriend?
Christ, I don't know.
I ain't from Chicago, pal. That's not what I asked.
Sir, orders are orders. Step out for identification.
Who plays at Wrigley Field, sir?
This war apparently is being won by lunatics.
Wrigley Field? Good God, man, I've no idea.
The Army had not been physically cut in two, but its movement was being slowed by suspicion, one question at a time.
Soon, even real Americans were rehearsing how to be American before they reached the barrier.
In those days, the American Army did something no enemy planner could have fully scripted. It turned itself into an exam on national identity.
Germany did not seize the bridges it needed, but it made an entire army prove it was American at every crossroads. Once the roads turned suspicious, the disguise stopped being an advantage and became a countdown.
Too many posts now.
Then every post becomes the last one. Accent, gear, hesitation. The wrong easy answer, watch all of it.
By the second half of December, more of Greif was being collected than deployed.
Every capture ended the same way. Olive drab peeled back, and the operation turned from deception into evidence.
Name, rank, unit.
From mid-December onward, the rear area stopped being a hunting ground for Greif and became a trap.
However boldly Greif had been conceived, many of its men were no longer moving west. They were moving into custody.
Once captured in enemy uniform, the commandos were no longer just prisoners. They became a legal problem.
Use of enemy uniform for hostile acts crosses into unlawful deception.
Camouflage, feints, and deception were common in war. Fighting or sabotaging in the enemy's uniform was another matter.
The disguise was no longer a tool. It was an exhibit.
Not costume alone. Action taken in the enemy's uniform, that is what makes the charge fatal.
The rear area panic had always been emotional. The next stage would be administrative, exact, and lethal.
This was not the language of daring raids. It was the language of military law.
By then, everyone in the room understood that the law was not discussing imprisonment alone.
Paris, Billing, and Schmidt would become the most visible faces of a mission already collapsing around them.
There was nothing theatrical about the room. That made it heavier.
Charged with acting as spies and saboteurs in enemy uniform.
The disguise that had been designed to confuse Americans now served to convince an American court.
What had sounded like a daring assignment in October now sounded, in court, like a fatal category.
By now, the operation had a human face, and it looked less like legend than like exhaustion.
In wartime military justice, uncertainty often ends quickly.
Sentence of death by shooting.
There was no need for drama. The sentence was already enough.
On December 23, 1944, the sentence was carried out. The Army treated it as procedure. That made it colder, not cleaner. At the end of disguised warfare stood rifles, procedure, and no more ambiguity.
Whatever they had intended in American uniforms, they would die in German identity under Allied judgment.
The law had finished speaking.
Henri Chapelle was not the end of the legal reckoning. It was the model for what followed. The details changed from case to case. The legal logic rarely did.
More trials followed. More sentences followed. In all, 17 men would be executed for the operation.
Nothing about it looked heroic once the paperwork was finished. The borrowed uniform had opened roads. It had also closed every legal door behind them. They had not opened the road for Germany. But failure did not rescue them from the consequences of how they had tried.
They did not open the road for Germany. But they still died as men who had crossed too far beyond the legal boundaries.
Measured against its intended objective, Greif failed. No critical bridge fell because of it.
The Meuse was still there, still guarded, still outside German reach.
No headquarters was shattered. No supply network collapsed. No single act of sabotage changed the campaign on its own. And without a true breakthrough, the commandos could not turn delay into victory.
On a tactical scorecard, the operation looked unimpressive at best.
But military failure is not the same as irrelevance. Grief still left a mark.
A turned sign did not win a campaign. It could still waste time the campaign could not afford to lose. No, we were sent wrong! Turn them around! A severed line rarely stayed dead forever. But war often turns on minutes, not forever.
Greif's best actions were small, confident lies that left larger men cleaning up after them.
No single disruption was decisive. Together, they created drag.
Greif did not shatter the American rear. It warped it.
That is why the operation is remembered as a tactical failure and still studied as a disruption success.
The records did not show triumph. They did show interference.
The American rear kept moving. It just moved more slowly and with less trust. We're feeding the front from a quiz line.
Armies run on rhythm as much as orders. Suspicion broke that rhythm.
Behind the front, trust was no longer free. It had to be performed and verified.
That was Greif's real battlefield by the end. Not the front line, but the rear looking over its own shoulder.
Fear had become a form of drag on the machine.
If you judge the mission by the task it was given, the verdict is simple. It failed.
If you judge it by the confusion it injected into the American rear, the answer is more complicated.
Greif remained small in manpower. Its echo inside the Allied rear was much larger.
In war, time is a resource. Greif could not win Germany the war, but it did cost the Americans some of that resource.
Paranoia is easy to dismiss in hindsight. In the moment, it behaves like terrain.
Greif failed tactically. It succeeded psychologically in ways the planners may not have fully predicted.
This was the image Greif left behind. Not conquest, but interruption. Greif did not open the road to German victory, but it made the American rear slower, better.
In 1947, Skorzeny was acquitted, not because Greif had become simple, but because the law could...
The trial settled a verdict. It did not settle the debate.
The post-war lesson was narrow but important. Deception could be lawful. Fighting in the enemy's uniform remained another matter.
In practice, the legal boundary could be as thin as a layer of cloth.
Long after the Bulge, soldiers and lawyers kept returning to Greif for the same reason. It showed exactly where the edge might be.
Greif did not invent deception. It helped clarify how carefully deception had to be separated from unlawful combat.
Greif also left a broader warning. Identity itself could become a battlefield vulnerability.
A uniform can persuade the eye. It cannot answer for the life lived inside it.
The questions themselves survived the war because they captured something the uniforms could not.
To later generations, it sounded ridiculous. To the men at the barrier, it felt practical, immediate, and difficult to fake.
Facts can be memorized quickly. Belonging usually cannot.
Long before digital credentials, trust had to be built from accent, paper, posture, memory, and instinct.
The baseball questions lasted because beneath the absurdity sat a serious lesson. Culture can function as security.
In the end, Greif is remembered less for what it destroyed than for what it made every man at the barrier ask.
Clothing can be stolen. Papers can be forged. A lived national culture is harder to counterfeit when fear puts it on trial.
The Germans could not pretend to be Americans long enough to win the battle, but they pretended long enough to make Americans doubt the men beside them.